I received a question, and I want to try to provide an answer to the question about why am I spending time like I am going through these different cities and giving you a historical background like I'm trying to do. I didn't do this on the first 3 times that I went through Revelation. As a matter of fact, I barely touched anything as far as historical on any of these particular cities. I just went straight into the lessons that the different letters to the different churches taught. And I thought that to be important. But whenever I got to basically thinking about everything that is going on, whenever I got thinking about the different situations that these Christians are finding themselves in, a lot has to do with their environment. A lot has to do with basically, I hate to say it like this, but the cards that they've been dealt. So this time I wanted to really take my time and research these particular churches that were part of these cities. Because as I've been studying, and guys, I apologize. I eat stuff like this up because once I understand this, and once that I see this through my mind's eye, it helps me to understand what these Christians are going through, and also what Jesus is trying to get them to do. Like I told y'all at the very first, we have to have our mindset as first century Christians. As first century Christians, we got to understand what environment that these Christians are living in. Some of these churches, the environment that they're living in really are not as bad as what others are. And there's a lot of influence because of that. You know, a lot of times peer pressure and influence has a lot to do with how we act, what we do, and how that we associate with other people. So I'd like to welcome you tonight to the city of Sardis. I'll be your tour guide. Welcome. You can tip at the door. Plant the corn earlier when you tell me. That's my tip. Okay. Sardis was founded all the way back in the 12th century before Christ. And it was one of the oldest and probably one of the most important cities of Asia Minor. Now, I'm hoping that my material, hopefully is still up here. It would be a major miracle if it is. But I'm not going to hold my breath because I don't look pretty blue. And it's not. Okay. I was going to show you where Sardis is. So I'll just tell you where it is. We studied where Thyatira was. So think about 35 miles southeast of Thyatira. 35 miles southeast. So let's say that we lived in Pasadena. How far is it from here to Galveston? About 40 miles. Okay, so almost as, maybe not as far from here to Galveston as it is from Thyatira down to Sardis, southeast of them. And it's located in what is now, of course, that is the western part of Turkey, near the Hermus River. Now, Sardis basically offers a wealth of insight whenever you look at it into the intertwining and the narratives of the Lydian, the Persian, the Greek, and the Roman cultures. And the reason why that it did, all 4 of these nationalities had ownership of this one town at one time. Pensacola, Florida is a very interesting city because it is known as, I can't remember how many, Six Flags, I think, that flies over Pensacola because of the different nationalities that I guess ruled over Pensacola at the time. And the history of that is very rich. This is almost exactly the same way because of the different cultures and the different nationalities that inhabited, that conquered, and that basically took over. And with each one of these phases, or each one of these different conquering of these different nations, as you can imagine, Sardis would change and kind of absorb and reflect that particular representative, dominant type culture of whoever was ruling over them at that particular time. They always seemed, though, to hold on to their Lydian heritage. They always held on to that, no matter there was always a preservative of element of the Lydian heritage there. I heard it said one time that you can take the Cajun out of Louisiana, but you can't take the Louisiana out of the Cajun. The same way. I mean, they just literally and truthfully, they kept that part of their heritage alive no matter who had authority over them. And for scholars and historians, looking at Sardis and looking backwards is basically like looking 20/20 vision, because what they can do is they can provide an illustrated case study to understand how that the different ancient civilizations, how that they would evolve, what did they do that caused this particular Sardis at this time to change. And because that the element of knowledge was so prominent here in Sardis, they use Sardis sort of like a baseline. Because if they say, okay, the Persians was over here at this particular city, looking at Sardis, they have like a go-by to understand what the Persian Empire, how the effects would be to that particular city. Even though there may or may not have any historical background, because of Sardis, they would apply what they've learned at Sardis with the different Lydia, Persian, and Greek and Roman background to these other cities to have a better understanding of what environment that they had, why they lived like they did, and how that they lived like that. And even modern society and modern Europe, all of these scholars that are even study this particular stuff, they say Sardis is the baseline. Sardis is where that we go to. And ancient historians and scholars, they turn to Sardis for any particular town or city in this region. And for some reason, Sardis had more detail and more knowledge of the different cultures that was handed down to them, and they reigned over them, than any of the other 7 churches. The city of Sardis also, it had a prime geographical location. It sat on the intersection of major trade routes between the Mediterranean Sea and inner regions of Asia Minor. You know, there is a saying that all roads lead through Rome. Well, they may, but all trade routes seem to have led through Sardis. And as such, it basically became the epicenter of commerce in all of Asia Minor. It was the standout of epicenter for every trade that you can imagine. The Lydian merchants traded in a variety of commodities, but Sardis was very similar to another city that we studied. They were particularly famous for textile industry and dye work. Anyone remember what city that we studied that was very, very into dye work? Thyatira. However, for Sardis, they were notably known for the production of a unique wool because of the sheep that they grazed on the side of this mountain that they didn't graze anywhere else. And they would harvest the wool off of this sheep that was so special, and then they would dye this wool. They would is it called woven? Is that what you do with wool in order to make clothes?
You weave it.
Weave it? They would weave it, and then once it was weaved together, they would dye it a crimson, a special crimson red color. And this was the only place that you could find this particular red color of crimson. And it was sought after through all the ancient world. As a matter of fact, there is part of this wool that is in one of the museums over in Rome today, where that you can see it, and they say that it's still priceless. So I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now, until they were captured by Cyrus in 549 BC, Sardis was the capital of the kingdom of Lydia. And after the total fall of the Roman Empire, now remember, I'm saying part of the Roman Empire fell. Whenever Domitian was assassinated, things totally changed for the Christians, as exactly it was prophesied in this book. But whenever the Roman Empire finally fell in AD 395, Sardis again was raised. Lydia came back into power, and Sardis was again elevated up to the kingdom and up as the capital of Lydia for that particular area. And Lydia was the richest kingdom of all of the ancient world. Now, where Sardis was not credited for inventing coin, if you remember, we also had we just studied who was famous for the first people to invent coins. Anybody remember? Coins.
Oh, coins.
Money. Who was
the metal people?
The metal people. Thyatira again. That's 2 in a row. Yes. Well, these particular individuals, they were known for creating and inventing coins that were made from electrum. Now, whenever I saw that word electrum, I had no idea what that means. Does anybody know what electrum means? I had to go and do some read. They will take gold and silver and mix it together somehow, some way in a furnace, and the results of the mixture of gold and silver is called electrum. And from that gold and silver mix, they then coined their currency from that. I had never heard of that before, but gold and silver mixed together, and then from that mixture and from that block, they was able to build their coins. Now, speaking of their wealth, this is interesting. In the book of History of the World, in volume 1, there is an American educator and historian called John Radcliffe. He says the following about the Lydian kingdom, and I had to write this down. He said, a great cause of the prosperity and wealth of the Lydian kingdom was the natural fertility of the country. No other of all Asia Minor had so rich a soil. So not only did they have the wool as one of their selling points, they also was one of the leading trade and exporters of any type of agriculture that you can imagine, olives and fruits and vegetables as well. They had it, and it was known that they had it because of the fertility of their soil. Now, there was a king by the name of Croesus. Now, this Croesus reigned when Cyrus captured Sardis, and he was famous for his wealth. As a matter of fact, he was so famous for his wealth, he was known to be filthy wealthy. I think we have heard that particular term before. There was another individual by the name of Solon. He was a great Athenian legislator. He spent time there in Sardis, especially during the reign of Croesus. And there were 7 wise men that was called the 7 wise men of Greece. These are individuals that at that particular time expanded their knowledge throughout the whole particular region, and he was one of them. The ancient city of Sardis was built on a plateau, and it had basically crumbling rock, which rose up to a height of almost 1,500 feet above sea level, and it made a plain. The plateau was part of the Mount Tumulus. If you look at the countryside over there, this Mount Tumulus raised up to 6,700 feet. Now, it's very interesting because the walls of the elevation of which the city was built up against this mountainside was almost perpendicular. And as such, the city was completely inaccessible except for one narrow passage. There was one narrow road. You go in by this road into Sardis, and you come out of that road out of Sardis. There was no other exit, in or out, one road. And as such, it was basically easy to fortify. All you had to do was just guard one road. And that's what they did. Everything else around them was very steep. Considered it was literally unbelievably steep to where that people just said you can't climb it. And at the base of the cliff flows the Pactolus River, which is very important. The Pactolus River was famous because it was carrying gold dust out of Mount Tumulus down to the Lydian Valley, which made the ancient kingdom of Lydia as wealthy as what it is, because gold over there was very, very prevalent. And gold back then is like gold is today. You can get rich off of it if you can find it. The river, I don't know if anybody studies mythology, but if you do study mythology, the Pactolus River is important to King Midas. King Midas was in mythology. Everything he touched turned to what? Gold. Well, he washed himself in this Pactolus River, and the magic of the river got rid of all of his golden touch. And poor King Midas could not touch anything and turn to gold any longer. Bless his heart. He didn't touch anything for me, I can tell you that. But now, they said that Sardis was completely impregnable, what they said. But Cyrus the Great marched against Alexerxes, and at the place that Xerxes gathered his mighty army was basically before the expedition into Greece. They ended in a humiliating defeat. In AD 1402, Tamerlane destroyed the city, and it was never rebuilt. What's left of there is now a little miserable, little bitty growth or outcrop that is called by the name of Sart, S-A-R-T. That is everything that remains of the great Sardis. Now, there are many known tombs that date back to this period, and excavations of the cemeteries around Sardis and archaeology from 1910 all the way through 1914. They produce wonderful examples of jewelry, and all that jewelry that they have they gathered is now in the where I can't say this, Istanbul Archaeological Museum. That I did some research on that museum. That museum in Istanbul has some of the jewelry from around the ancient world that was created and built by these other towns and so on and so forth. And to say it is priceless would be an understatement. As I said, Sardis seen itself as basically being impenetrable because you had all of these rock cliffs that go straight up and this one particular road. So, I mean, nobody can get in here. All we need to do is just worry about one road. So they got overconfident, completely overconfident, because nobody could come in unless they let them in. So the walls was carelessly guarded, which sometimes was fatal in the results. The failure to watch that particular wall and to guard the wall allowed Cyrus to capture the city. Now in 549 BC, Solon had warned Croesus not to be too confident, because somebody can come in here with a better army and take you over. And so Croesus didn't have any reason for concern. I got one road. I'll guard one road. This is Sardis. We have the mountain behind us. We have these great walls around us. No one can get in here. Well, one night a Persian soldier looked at that wall and said, I'm going to climb it. So he approached the wall next to the citadel and he climbed that steep wall. The stories that I saw about this, I am reminded of a story. A long time ago, there was a country comedian that was, my mind went just as blank as it could be. He was from Yazoo City, Mississippi. Jerry Clower. He tells the story about that this one hunter that went with them. They said, you can't climb that tree to get that coon out, and it made him mad, and he pulled his shoes off. And Jerry tells about how that he hung his toenails in the tree, and he climbed that tree. Well, according to what they said, that's basically what this Persian soldier did. Removed his, he must have had toenails for sure, but he removed his shoes, walked up to that, and it was almost perfectly straight up and down, and climbed that thing. Come to find out, he wasn't by himself. Other Persians said, well, if he can climb it, we can climb it too. They climbed it. There is an ancient Greek historian called Herodotus. He's known as the father of history. This is what he says. I had to write this down. Climbed the rock himself, and other Persians followed in his track until a large number had mounted on the top. Thus, Sardis was taken and given up entirely to pillage. So, I mean, don't say that it can't be taken. Sardis can be taken, and the Persians took it, and they literally took it completely over. Well,
Sounds like Masada.
Yes, ma'am. A lot like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a matter of fact, they didn't learn their lessons because 330 years later, Antiochus, the Great, came and did the exact same thing. They overthrew it again. So, he had basically warned Croesus that was going to happen. No human being is self-sufficient, and this is what Solon told him. No human being is self-sufficient in every respect. Something is always lacking. In every matter, it becomes us to mark well the end, for oftentimes the divinity gives men a gleam of happiness and then submerges them in ruin. That's pretty deep. No human being is self-sufficient in every respect. Something is always lacking. In every matter, it becomes us to mark well the end, for oftentimes the divinity gives men a gleam of happiness and then submerges them in ruin. And that's exactly what happened to Sardis twice. Croesus' wealth was not just legendary. As a matter of fact, it permeated every aspect of life in Sardis, and it was deep rooted in the whole city culture and agriculture and everything else that they had. If you walked into the city of Sardis, you could see that buildings were lined and had gold on it. It was lavished. Grand monuments. Everything that was in the city reflected the lavishness of Croesus, who was one of the wealthiest kings of that whole area, because the gold coming down from the mountain that they were able to get. And the Lydian people, because that they had so much money, they loved art, they loved agriculture, they did everything as far as prosperity, and the only thing about it was they didn't share it. They kept it to themselves. So Croesus, the rule ended with the Persian invasion, but the legendary wealth that was in place stayed in place, and the Persians started picking up the gold, and it continued to be a major economic hub all the way until that the Romans came in. And even whenever the Romans came in, the Romans helped strengthen it. Its legacy, still an epicenter of trade, the innovation, the culture, all of that the Roman influence brought in. In other words, Rome came in, seeing what it was, seeing how it had the money that was involved in Sardis, and Rome said, honey, I'm home, and took it over. And then they literally took what they had and said, well, we can add to this. And that's what they did. That's exactly what they did. They kept on adding to it until now. I've got a city as a Christian there in Sardis. Everywhere I look is money. Everywhere I look, there's gold. But I can't touch it. I'm a Jew. Everybody else is rich, but not I. I am living not from payday to payday. I'm living from, I guess, as the old saying goes, from one bean to the next bean. And you start to think about what those Jews had to go through, the influence that was all around them, and everything that they had because of this Croesus. Folks, I tell you something, those poor people, they could see people just lavishing themselves with anything that they wanted. The riches were just unbelievable. And these Jews were living below, so far down below poverty is not even funny. Sardis, it was all of this economic boom that you could call it, but the Jews played nothing into it. I read some of the different historical parts by Eusebius from the Jewish perspective, and he made mention that some of the families, we get up in the morning and we think of breakfast, lunch, and supper, or as we call it, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or however that you want to, 3 meals a day. He said that the Jews of this particular area and the Jews at this particular time, they didn't see 3 meals a day. They didn't see 2 meals a day. He said sometimes the way that they planned their meals were they would eat on average maybe 3 times a week.
Oh, wow.
And that is food that they could steal, or somehow food that they could get some way or the other. So that's the way that they saw their food.
They could
not
crop of any kind?
No, ma'am. What Eusebius said, that it was every single time that a Jew would come to one of the guilds for food or anything like that, they would throw Domitian up. Is that your God? And if you said, no, that's not my God is Jehovah, that individual, that Jew was marked, that family was marked, 9 chances out of 10 that the head of the family was taken by force, thrown in prison or killed, and then you were just left with the mother and children, and then they would either be brought into slavery or they would be used for prostitution or stuff like that.
Where have you heard that one before?
I know, brother. I know. But if you look at that archaeological record, the historians look at that and the impact of the Greek and the other cultures that came in. It is just, you can see that today because there's still some of the ruins there. Now there is still a huge, I guess, community of Jews that still lives in this particular area. Like I said, you don't have Sardis there. You have this one little podunk city that's called Sard. But around that particular area, you still have this particular group of Jews. And they say that these Jews that are living there now has their ancestral history all the way back to the Jews that were under the Roman Empire. It's very interesting whenever that you read the account of Eusebius to see how that because of the way that they had to live, because of what that they had to endure, it's sort of like whenever that the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, they passed down what happened to generation to generation to generation. Well, the same thing happens. These poor Jews that lived under Domitian and lived under that particular rule, they passed down this hardship from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And Eusebius says that in his second book, he said that the stories that they tell is one, he uses the phrase pain and suffering and horror. Pain and suffering and horror. The city was for many centuries a significant point of junction between the Greeks and the Aegeans and the Persians, because the traders and the caravans would always come through. So there was always money, always money there. It was 133 before Christ, 133 years before Christ, Sardis came under that Roman rule, and they were distinguished as a principal city. Like I said, Rome seen everything they had, and they poured that money into it, and the city flourished under the Roman rule. They had temples grew. They went into the river, and the Romans built aqueducts to bring water into the city so that they didn't have to go outside the city to get water. They had a civic building that they had all of their court system in. They had a amphitheater there that would seat 15,000 people. They had everything you can imagine in there, but there was no church buildings found in Sardis. None. If any churches were to be had or to be found, it would be in somebody's house under the cover of darkness. There, like I said, it's the Roman rule that was there. Even as much as they flourished, it was not without challenges. They faced earthquakes over there, and all of those beautiful temples and all those buildings that had gold and stuff like that, they crumbled. Serious damage happened. I mean, they also had invasion from different groups. They were not as I guess you could say, penetrable as what they thought that they were. But in all of that, Sardis kept everything going until it was just destroyed. And like many cities of the region, Sardis began to fall. And after the 6th and early 7th centuries after death, the city was hardly there except for just Sardis. So that's as much history as I can find out for that particular city. Now where we go into and we can read next week, looking at the actual letter, you can see that the influence of the gold, the influence of the wealth. Do you believe that wealth can change somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Not for the good.
Not for you. That plays into, we will see how that will play into the Jews next week. Because anything like that plays into their hand. And that's what that they're dealing with. I would recommend, if you did this week, look at the letter, make yourself some notes. There's so much that we can learn about this one city, so much that we can learn about this letter that we can apply to Waters Road. And guys, that's what we need to do. That's another reason why I'm taking my time and going through these different churches like I'm going through, because there's lessons for us to learn. Every one of these churches, we hear Jesus say, those that have an ear, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. In other words, what I told them back there almost 2,000 years ago, I'm telling you today. If something needs to be fixed, fix it. Yes, sir. It's your church anyway. Any questions before we go? I don't know how that you like this historical stuff. I know some people, I'm not going to call their name, but their initial is Edwina, could care less about it.
I like history.
You do. But now when we get into this, you can see the influence that happened and why the influence happened and what these Christians are basically having to go up against. And I am hoping, especially Sardis, because the letter to Sardis was not good. It was not a good letter. Jesus didn't say, come to the feast. Any questions, comments? Let's go to God in prayer. Father, tonight we're supposed to get some rain, and it's supposed to be kind of bad weather. The roads may be slick, Father, and we've come together. We have studied about this town, Father, this city, this whole area, and the influence that these particular Jews are dealing with, and what that they are being confronted, and how that they're having to basically act. And Father, we're about to leave to go home. So it's my prayer, Father, that you would be with every one of us and give us a safe journey home and keep us safe, Father. Father, thank you so much for this body of believers that meets here at Waters Road. And as always, I pray, Father, that you would bless them in ways that they could never even imagine. I pray, Father, that you would always be mindful of us. Help us, Father, to always be looking, always be searching, have our hearts open and our eyes open. And if anyone has any desire and comes to us with an open heart, I pray, Father, that as they are looking for the truth, allow us, Father, just to plant the seed. Father, thank you so much for everything that you do for us. We ask you to forgive us of our sins, love us, and save us. In Jesus' name, amen. I love y'all, folks. Thank y'all so much.